Hi everyone! In this video, I'm starting the restoration of my new car, which I bought in the USA, and the most interesting part is that I'll try to do it in my garage. Before this, I had an old 1997 Audi A6 C5. It was a reliable helper, but it had become outdated and constantly needed repairs. Those who follow my channel know this very well. I decided it was time to move on and started looking for a newer car. I wanted to buy a vehicle that hadn't been driven in Russia or Belarus, which meant I had to search abroad. The available options included expensive European car auctions with high mileage, more affordable American auctions with low mileage cars, but often damaged or flooded. I chose the more affordable option, a damaged car from the USA. Plus, I already had some experience with repairs. My main goal was to find a car that I could restore myself. It also needed to meet the criteria for favorable customs clearance, 3 to 5 years old with a 1.5-liter engine. Considering all these factors, I started searching for suitable options on American auctions. I focused on two models, the Chevrolet Equinox and the Ford Escape, as they are easier to restore due to the availability of spare parts and their popularity. Eventually, I found a promising option on the Copart auction, a 2020 Ford Escape. The car wasn't drivable. From the photos, it was clear that one of the wheels was torn off, meaning the suspension needed repairs. Additionally, the fender, bumper, and headlight required fixing. On the bright side, the car's safety systems were intact. None of the airbags deployed. And it had excellent mileage, just under 18,000 miles. After winning the auction, I paid for the car and its delivery. Shortly after, the shipping company in the USA loaded the vehicle and sent me photos before transport. After a few months of waiting, the Ford finally arrived in Belarus. It spent a day at customs, and then my new car was loaded onto a tow truck for transport straight to my garage. The car is finally in my garage, and now I can examine it in more detail to understand exactly what needs to be repaired or replaced. From the auction photos, I initially thought I would only need to replace the control arm and the outer CV joint. However, after a closer look, it became clear that the brake disc was damaged by the caliper during the impact. The CV joint, control arm, stabilizer link, tie rod, wheel hub, and strut also need to be replaced. I decided to start with the suspension to get the car back on the road. My plan is to make it drivable, take it for a test run to ensure everything works properly, and only then move on to body repairs. By removing all the damaged parts, a closer inspection will reveal exactly what needs to be replaced. At the same time, I'm making a list of necessary parts and starting to search for them at local junkyards. Judging by how stubborn the brake disc is, the wheel hub studs are likely bent. If I can find a replacement hub, pressing it out of the steering knuckle might be tricky. I had no trouble removing the steering knuckle. When all the bolts are new, disassembling the suspension is a pleasure. Next, I need to extract the outer CV joint from the knuckle. I clamped it in a vise and used a box end wrench to break the nut loose. After removing the joint, I spun the hub again and realized that, besides the bent studs, the bearing itself was also deformed from the impact as the hub rotated with noticeable resistance. I also can't rule out the possibility that the steering knuckle might be bent as well. I continued disassembling the suspension components, and next up was the strut, which is held by 3 bolts. To access it, I had to remove some plastic covers in the engine bay. To remove the cowl panel, I needed to take off the windshield wiper arms. This job requires a special puller. There's no way to do it without one. I removed the strut, and I found that the mounting point where it connects to the steering knuckle was slightly bent. I'll need to either find a replacement shock absorber or buy a complete strut assembly. Next, I unbolted the engine cover. Honestly, I was surprised to find it still intact. After that, I removed the remains of the front bumper guard, which had broken during transportation. I then moved on to removing the lower control arm. It's attached to the subframe with 2 bolts, one of which is hidden. To access it, I had to remove the reinforcement bracket. This required lifting the lower radiator mount with a jack before I could loosen the bolts. I successfully removed the lower control arm. As you can see, it's aluminum, and the ball joint that should be here is completely gone. Since the stabilizer link was not only bent but also missing a bolt, it needs to be replaced as well. And, of course, the steering rack was also damaged by the impact. The tie rod is slightly bent. I won't try to straighten it, but will replace it with a new one instead. I've dealt with tie rods before on my Audi, and it was quite a struggle. But here, it's much easier. I removed the boot and used a pipe wrench to unscrew the bent tie rod with little effort. Finally, I removed the axle from the inner joint. Since I couldn't find a separate outer CV joint, I'll have to buy the entire axle assembly. All the damaged suspension components have been removed. Honestly, I didn't expect to replace this much. In addition to the parts I've already removed, I'll also need to replace the caliper bushings and rubber seals. Now it's time to start searching for parts and putting together a restoration plan. The main goal is to find high-quality parts at a reasonable price. I'll be checking local junkyards and online marketplaces for the best options. I also need to decide what to do about the headlight. One of the mounting brackets is broken, so I'll likely use a repair kit if I can find a suitable one. Replacing the entire headlight would be expensive, and the lens and housing are still in good condition. As for the bumper, I've decided to try restoring it since the plastic itself is mostly intact. I'll need to buy several clips and some plastic welding materials for the repair. The fender will definitely be replaced. Finding a used one in good condition for a reasonable price is challenging, so buying a new one seems like the best option. Regarding the door, I discovered a dent in the lower section. I'm still considering whether to try pulling it out myself or to take it to a body shop. Once all the parts are collected, the next stage will be installing them and preparing the car for its first test drive. Stay tuned for the next steps.